Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our sixth, and I can't believe it, the final in our series of Nature Calling conversations brought to you by the National Landscape Association. These sessions invite our Nature Calling commissioned artists with experts from other disciplines for conversations about artistic practice. In case you don't know, Nature Calling conversations are part of a wider programme of activity which happened across England this year from May to October. And you can find out more from our website, which is naturecalling.org.uk. So, for this sixth conversation, we've brought together Becca Gill, the Artistic Director of Radical Ritual, and the commissioned artist from Dorset National Landscape, and the celebrated children's author, Sita Brahmachari. Today, we'll be discussing the artistic collaboration between Becca and Sita, plus their wider team, that brought you the Consequences Giant on 3 hillsides in Dorset this September. You'll get a chance to see some of the footage of the Giant's reveal and some of the behind the scenes engagement work, which was so central to this work. And finally, Sita will be presenting a small excerpt from The Giant in Me Sees the Giant in You, and a new creation of and a new myth grown out of the creation of the sorry, I've read that all wrong. A new myth grown out of the creation of the project. So we look forward to that later on. So, oh yeah, I should say, if you do have a question, please pop it in the Q&A function and we'll get through as many as we can at the end. So welcome, Becca and Sita. As we've been discussing earlier, there is so much to discuss about this project. It's so complex and there's so many wonderful layers to it. But Becca, firstly, can we start at the beginning, and could you say something about how the project and the collaboration came about?
Yeah, sure. It's been a wonderful journey of alchemy, really, in terms of the people who we've worked with on the project, and then eventually the giant that we created at the end. So my initial person that I reached out to was Nick Hayes, who wrote the Book of Trespass. I was really inspired by his work in Right to Roam and access for people into landscapes. We had lots of conversations about how we don't understand the stories that are connected to the giant kind of landmarks that exist across our country, and why it is that we don't understand those stories and how history has kind of erased those. And it felt really important to me to bring in an incredible writer and someone who creates incredible stories that really connect people to a sense of belonging and landscape and kind of all of the interesting worlds that we have in our minds. And I've always loved Sita's work. And we also both went to Central School of Speech and Drama and did the same course in applied theatre many years ago. And so I was very inspired to reach out to Sita, and we had a wonderful conversation and realised there was a lot in common in terms of how we were thinking. And then I also reached out to the incredible Grace Emily Manning, who does the most wonderful work with natural materials in dyeing and creating incredible artworks in her own right. And she felt like the perfect fit for the team. And then in terms of music, we had lots of different conversations about the kind of people that we wanted to work with, and people who were rooted in Dorset or rooted in that environment felt really important. And Douglas Dare is from Bridport, which is just down the road from the Sir Navis Giant, and obviously does the most extraordinary music that has this kind of real resonance with landscape, and has written songs about running up hills with his mother and extraordinary extraordinary work. So we thought bringing him in as a composer would really make sense, and thankfully he was excited to join us on the journey. And then Nick Llewellyn, who runs a company called Access All Areas, was part of our advisory group. And Access All Areas do incredible work led by learning disabled artists. And so he really advised on working with learning disabled people and people with neurodiversity, who kind of were really at the core of this project, along with the other groups. Sarah Fry, who is a historian who's written lots of books about giants. I went to a conference about the Cernabus giant in Dorset at the museum, and it was fantastic. I think I was one of the only women there, and most of the people had kind of red trousers, and it was and big beards, and they were all archaeologists, and it was extraordinary. And lots of people were talking about dating the Cernabus giant, and Sarah did a wonderful talk about giants and about how they may well have existed, and sparked my imagination around the kind of folklore and the mythology of giants. So I immediately reached out to her to be part of the team. And Ina Miller, who is our production manager, is an incredible production manager. And it's worth saying that we're really female-led in this organisation. So having a female production manager was really important to us. And of course, Emily Williams, who is the exec producer for the project and exec director of Radical Ritual. Her work is just extraordinary and often works with lots of different people in lots of different contexts. So the whole team is just wonderful. And we came together at 101 Outdoor Arts, thanks to Simon and Danielle there. And we had an incredible couple of days where we played with lots of the materials with Grace. We talked about the complexity of why we don't understand our myths and our folklore, and we talked a lot about how we were going to create this giant. And at that stage, it felt completely mythical. It felt like something that we just did not know how that was going to happen. But having those 2 days together and sleeping and eating and talking really built a kind of foundation for the project. And then we had a talk that we opened out to the public called Be More Giant, which you can still watch on YouTube, where everyone kind of talked about their own context and what they were bringing to the project. And I feel like that kind of gave us a brilliant kickstart into creating the Consequences giant.
We are going to see a film in a bit about sort of the engagement, all the incredible groups that you engaged and how you went about it. But Sita, I wonder whether you could bring your reflections a bit around how you found this kind of collaboration of not just artists, but all these incredible ideas around mythology. And I just wanted to say something very, very quickly, Becca. You mentioned about being kind of women-led organization. Well, kind of this project was very women-led, and how so much of mythologies around giant is quite male and male dominant. And I just feel like here's another layer of interpretation that you sort of brought to this mythology. But anyway, over to you, Sita.
Well, it's amazing listening to Becca talking about all of the different people that have been involved in the project, and Becca's incredible vision from the start of bringing artists and environmentalists and activists and communities together to really properly engage with landscape and bring their people to bring their stories to the landscape. And when we set off, as Becca said, with the project, and we were doing our incredible dreaming and planning with Grace, bringing her incredible potions made from gorse and hawthorn and pestles and mortars and grinding paint, and then working out how we will make our mark in art on the landscape. And you can see the giant behind us, and the head and the body and the heart and the legs and the roots. And we were looking at we were looking really deeply at the diversity of nature and the balance of the natural world, and how we as artists, the one thing that we all have in common is this sense of awe that kind of feeds us every day about when we wake in the morning, the dawn. I live in London now, the kind of the woodland that I've walked my dog through this morning. And the thing that brings us together in a time of such divides was one of the things we talked about very deeply. And because Becca had worked and thought really deeply about, and this is kind of part of our joint practice and training really, to really think about how to bring the groups, the different communities to this project, the communities, refugee and migrant communities, neurodiverse adults and young people, often people that don't get to walk these hillsides or don't feel that sometimes that they belong within these rural environments, which I had a keen sense of as a child myself, growing up in Lake District, Shropshire, different environments, that sense of, who does this land belong to? Who does it feed? Who does it nurture? And because Becca had so carefully thought about which groups she was going to invite, all of whom had were part of insight of this incredible Cernabus giant, but hadn't particularly experienced the flora and fauna of this landscape. So as well as the collaboration of artists that Becca's talking about, the collaborators that, we were working with in the village hall, in sight of the Cernabus giant, the teachers who came, Caroline and Sue from National Landscapes, and people who really know about the flora and fauna of this walk and what it meant. And then the refugee and migrant communities who'd never been to that village hall before. The way that the welcome was set up was so incredible and so thorough. And what I call, in a lot of my stories, I call it heart work. And heart work, as we know in society, people who work, for example, in the National Health Service or education or librarians, heart work is the work you do which goes way beyond what you're invited to do. Because in every molecule of this project, there was heart work from everybody that took part in it, that they wanted. People were not only kind of, cerebrally thinking about a project that could, bring people to landscape, but they were really working from the heart. And the heart of this giant is such a beautiful thing. It contains, global diaspora people from around the world, the imprints of all of us who are here in this country. This work is really hard to achieve, and Becca and the whole team, and we talked about this a lot. We were often in that village hall turning around from one group to another, how we would make the project work, the shadow work we were doing, the painting work that we were doing, the storytelling work that we were doing, how it would work differently with the different groups. And I'm thinking, Becca, now about Daniel, and I'm thinking of that day when Grace, Emily Manning, who's the most wonderful artist who I've had the privilege to work with in my stories and patchwork storytelling quilts, and since she was in her, since she was at art college, she had her beautiful potion table out, as we called it, with incredible sort of chalks and things made from hazel and bark and driftwood that she was explaining to the children. And the look on the young people's and adults' faces about how they would make this giant from the natural pigments of the landscape was amazing. But then I'm seeing in front of my eyes this one young person, Daniel, who was there. Becca, do you want to tell how did this giant get its trunk?
Yeah, that was
Becca, definitely tell us that story now, and then we'll go straight into the film afterwards, if that's okay.
Great. Yeah, so that was beautiful, Sita, and I think it is hard work, and I think the things that were surprising about that time that we spent in the Cernabus Village Hall and on the hillside and collecting the materials, and it really had these transformational moments within it that are hard to kind of write down on a bit of paper or express. And one of those was Daniel, who was an incredible young man who was part of Able to Achieve, who work with adults with learning disabilities. And he's largely non-verbal, and sort of was on the walk and taking part, but then not kind of fully, like, we weren't sure basically how he was going to express himself through what he did. And there was a point at which Sita and Grace were kind of grinding chalk, and I think Grace just handed him a stick and a bit of indigo paper, and Daniel kind of dipped the stick into the chalk paint and just started to draw. And it was one of those moments where kind of sent shivers up my spine, when everything just sort of goes very still and everyone is just watching this moment, because it felt quite sort of monumental and special. And he just kept drawing, and as he was drawing, we realized that he was drawing an elephant, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And then surprisingly, lots of people started drawing elephants. And so when because the process that we had was that everybody's artwork was within giant itself. And so we had to collect everything that everybody created. And when I was collating that all together, we had about 20 elephants that had all been drawn. And that evening, Sita and I went to the Cernabus Brewery, which is a fantastic place in Cernabus, and had a pint with the locals, which was delicious, and started talking to someone there who was saying that his wife, who collects flint, was walking on the hillside and had found a bone that the British Museum was looking into that may well have been an elephant or a primordial elephant bone from that hillside. And then me and Sita kind of, I don't know if it was the beer, but we had that moment of going, oh my God, all these elephants. And at that point we realized that the elephant trunk had to be a kind of main feature of this giant. So that's how it got its trunk. And when Daniel and Daniel's carer came to see the giant when it was on the hillside in Yeovil and saw his artwork, it was quite a moment, I think, for them to realise that what he created was such a large feature of what finally became.
It's a wonderful story of connection, not just for the people in the room, but also with the hillside itself, it feels. So, okay, we will quickly go on to the film because I think that absolutely encapsulates everything that you've just been saying.
This project is a radical ritual production called Consequences. It's all about understanding our connection to nature, but more so understanding our connection to our kind of ancient monuments and these kind of big landmarks, and especially the Cernabus giant. So the reason for doing a giant game, which is the game of consequences, is to try and make sure that everybody is involved. We've created the head with a group of neurodiverse teenagers from Yeovil. We've created the legs with a group from Able to Achieve, who are adults with learning disabilities. The heart and the torso is being created by people from the global majority from around Somerset. And we've been creating the feet with primary school children from Birchfield Primary School.
We have sung, we have danced, we have played, we have done an enormous game of consequences. Somehow the magic of Sita and Becca and Grace, they just sort of reel them in.
So we go into the landscape and we work with our incredible colleagues from National Landscapes to help us understand the natural world.
We are from Birchfield and we have been on a hike up to the hill and we've gone pond dipping.
And then we come back together with our incredible artists, Grace Emily Manning and with Sita Brahmachari. And there's an alchemy and a magic in that and a ritual in that.
And we've been collecting chalk, and once we put water in it, they're like a chemical liquid, and we mix it and then it becomes like a paint.
Today, refugee people from Syria, Palestine, Turkey have been here with their children, and we've played magical games. And the adults have joined in, and also the teenagers, the sort of 15 and 16-year-olds who've got their younger brothers and sisters here, because they know there's a lot of healing to do.
There's something about nature that just touches your heart and soul in a way that nothing else can.
I went for a walk around the giant to look at some flowers.
Mother Nature creates everything. Life, trees and animals. Everything is possible.
Yeah, it's nice to sit on the grass because it's like a natural cushion. Although I say that, I'm sitting on chalk right now.
There's something special about chalk. And chalk, well, there's quite a lot of it here. There's not a lot of it in the world.
I love getting out and sharing my passion with kids. And I think it's important to do this not just with kids, but with everybody, because if you know what you've got, why it's important, think of it as special, and then you might look after it a bit better.
Oh, look, it's a heart. It does look like a heart. It does look like it. And actually, there's a plant very much like this in my native Bangladesh.
This is my home country and where my mum and dad were born and I was born. It really means a lot to me because my family are there and it's just lovely.
Traditionally, people of colour, people like myself, don't feel comfortable in spaces like this, so it's been really good to work with the different organisations that have arranged this to bring people out into the countryside, and I think that's really helped for the future. You know, people will go into those green spaces and feel like, well, actually, it's for everybody.
Sometimes belonging to the landscape takes longer to build, but I hope with everybody there'll be that little seed of sort of a good feeling about nature.
This is a project about possibilities and hope for the future, and I cannot tell you what it's meant to me to be a part of it.
Giants, stand up on my shoulders, tell me what you see. I am a giant!
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much. That's great to see that again. It's always good to remind us all of that wonderful process. So what's it like seeing that again, or if that happened back in May? Is that right?
Yeah,
I mean, I found it so emotional. I mean, so emotional to see it. I've seen it before, but just to be talking about it with people who've come because they're interested in discussing this in the times that we're living in. I've done so much writing about this project because it feels like, for me, it's been this incredibly special, as an artist, as an individual, healing project. And it's hard to explain, but when you see the participants and the people that have created this communal piece of artwork, and because we spent real quality time together in ways that you wouldn't normally do, the slow work of mixing paint and then deciding what you're going to paint and the stories you want to tell. You do feel like it's been true engagement with those people, and you do know that in the way that often people talk about in kind of projects and put into applications, that we want to make a difference as artists in people's lives, and you do know that people felt stronger from being part of this project, and felt great pride in it. And I feel personally quite emotional about it. It's quite simply, it's one of the most truly cohesive projects I have ever had the privilege to be involved in.
And Becca, I wonder whether you could just pick up a little bit about what happened next after the making of the piece, and maybe describe it a little bit in terms of, because obviously we've seen lots of images, but there's so much detail in there, and what happened over September.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I feel quite emotional too, Sita, every time I watch it, and I've seen it a lot. And every time I kind of just remember being there. And yeah, so in terms of what happened after the workshops, so obviously everyone created their own expression of themselves and of the landscape. And in designing what the giant looked like, we worked with different groups, as I mentioned in the film. So the head was created with a group of neurodiverse young people from Fairmead School. And that group were just extraordinary. I loved them. They kind of got really stuck in with the materials and kind of covered their faces in blue. And it was quite a sensory experience. And they loved the kind of the owl eyes and the flora and fauna that we had images of within the workshops that were taken from the hillside at Cerne Abbas. And so the head of our giant has a beautiful sunflower eye. It has a third eye, because Lacey, who was part of that group, was an incredible artist and kept drawing this third eye, and was very keen that our giant had a third eye, which we were very happy about. We've got kind of the butterfly ears from the hillside, and a constellation eye, as if the giant is looking up into the sky and is part of the stars and the moon and so on, as well as the ground itself. And we incorporated everybody's artwork into each of the pieces. So that was quite a process. We needed computers with really big processing power, because we scanned and photographed absolutely everything, and collaged it together as they'd kind of collaged at the end of the workshops. And something to mention was the ritual element of the workshops that was so powerful. And obviously, having a company called Radical Ritual, I believe in rituals, but I believe in them even more after this process. So after everybody had created their artwork, Sita led us in a kind of walk out to a huge canvas that we had outside, and we always did the last bit of making outside. And everybody put their artwork onto this kind of collaged part of the giant and said something about it as they put it down. And that was incredibly powerful, the things that people said, especially when we were creating the heart with the Yeovil Together groups. I don't know, Sita, if you want to say something about
that was a beautiful ritual, and we used everything, as I said, and song was a major part of bringing us together. So people processed out to this huge part of the canvas and laid their dreams and their wishes and their memories of plants and trees, of home, of faraway homes, onto this landscape, their wishes for the future. There was so much that was said in the artwork and so much that was unsaid in the artwork that was kind of shared in those communal moments. But having that moment for everybody, adults, teenagers, children, and led by with the wonderful Justna of Yeovil Together, bringing people together in trust and in welcome, having people place those their dreams and wishes down, and their artwork, and see and know that it would be part of a much larger giant, which they didn't know. They didn't know what the moving parts or the journeying parts would be. We tried not to say legs, we tried to say journeying parts. So after the heart came the belly and then the journeying parts. And they didn't know what the rest of the giant would look like. So they knew what their part of the giant contained, but they didn't know what the next part would look like. So there was this very natural thing that, when you're a children's storyteller, particularly, what happens next? What's it going to look like? And so I do remember on the day when we went back to Yeovil, where the people that had made the heart of Yeovil Together were from, it was the day of the right-wing parade through London, and so I had to go the day before, something that hasn't happened since the 1970s, to be protected, to stay overnight in Yeovil, because there was so much happening in London going through Waterloo. And we then had our own parade where so many people from Yeovil that had been part of this project came together, including, there's too much to say, but including the farmer. I met the farmer there that had that had swept the land to prepare for the giant to be unravelled on that landscape. So the people who were seen and the people who were unseen, who took part in this project, who you might think are unlikely to have been part of this project, were so many more than you can count. And we paraded together in Yeovil on the same day, on the same hour as the right-wing protest was happening in London. And I think without anyone talking about it, and we paraded saying, together we are giant, together we are strong, together we weave magic of belonging in this song. And there are people from the global majority, people like Daniel's family that had lived there for generations. All of these people, British people in Britain, exploring that landscape, exploring unity, were walking together. I'll never forget that. And we set off and it was absolutely not planned, but we set off at exactly the same time as that right-wing march in London. And, it did feel like historic. And then to see how the Cernabus giant was taken to people's heart to see it picked as the Guardian picture of the week, and to see how it spoke, how the individual contributions of people from young, tiny children to adults, how their individual contributions were seen as giant in the national landscape. That was a piece of magic, because often when you do this work, it's extremely quiet work, and apart from the people that do it, nobody else sees the value in it.
Oh, it sounds, yeah, I mean, it's sort of hairs the back of your neck kind of thing, referencing what was sort of the bigger national context, and actually the power of the connection and the realness, the real world, effectively, what was going on amongst your project. And some of the notes I've just got from our previous conversations around how the giant leaving an indelible, a tattooed mark on each of the hillsides, because obviously it appeared on 3 hillsides across September. And what do you sort of mean by that, maybe, about this sort of sense of connection and indelibility that this project had, in those areas?
Well, I mean, yes, it did. It first appeared next to the Cernabus giant, and we couldn't tell too many people about that because we didn't want to flood Cernabus. But we actually had lots and lots of people stopping who drive past every day to see the new giant, and kind of people that would drive past and not usually pull over were pulling over and having a look at the new giant. And we've had lots of comments about how this new giant has made the old giant look like it needs a bit of a facelift. And so I think there's some work being done on that now, which is great, which is a mark that has been left, is that that incredible ancient monument is, I think the National Trust are now looking at how they can do some restoration work on it. So that's an actual mark. Then it travelled to Yeovil, to Summerhouse Hill. And the idea of taking the giant there was that the community could actually come and have a look at what they'd done, so they could walk up the hill. So it was quite accessible, quite flat. And we had that incredible march that was completely serendipitous, the timing of that. And I was so pleased that that happened when it did. And all of those community members could walk up to the giant and put the flags down saying "Together we are giant," because we had these huge banners next to the giant, and they could see some of the kids that they drew around their feet, and there was a kid called Bella who'd drawn around her foot, and her foot was now bigger than she was physically. So this kind of thing of seeing something you've created small so large and so giant has an impact in terms of empowering people. And then our final place at Corfe Castle, the giant just sat below that castle so beautifully. And I think in terms of these indelible marks, it's been viewed now by over 27,000 people in real life, which is incredible. And online even more. I think 64,000 people have watched all the reels and everything. So it's had a real and a national impact, as Sita was talking about in The Guardian and BBC News. So in terms of this imprint, yes, it's not visibly there anymore, but those pictures still remain. Those kind of pictures in the people's minds who've created the giant still remain. And I think there's something that I'm wanting to explore more about: deep immersion in landscapes, which when you've worked in a landscape like Cernabus in the way that we did, it does start to become a home. There's a thing about walking in that landscape and the incredible holding which National Landscapes did with us, where they would talk about the sounds. We kind of listened deeply, we smelt, we felt, and we talked about how we were feeling as we walked through the landscape. It has a kind of a deep imprint on me, and I imagine everyone who walked on that landscape. And so there's a kind of a remnant of what's happened, which is quite beautiful, really, of the landscape itself within the people that have been in it, but also this kind of huge new giant that was created that still exists within kind of the world, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think that might be a good segue into watching a small video of just 1 minute, which shows the unveiling, and you can also hear more clearly the wonderful music that Douglas Dare created for it.
Rich is the life when giants can walk. Rich is the life when giants can walk.
Wonderful, great to see that. And as Becca mentioned, it was the reveal of it all sort of appeared in The Guardian, really, and that film sort of came out as that weekend. So yeah, there's a link to it if anyone wants to watch that again and see the images more closely. So well, time's moving on a little bit, and Sita is going to do an excerpt from her piece of work that kind of grew out of the process, really. So Becca, could you say a little bit more about this and how, and obviously Sita, I know, is prolific in writing lots of words around this project, but maybe a little bit more about this piece in particular.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Sita is incredible because she just writes things. Obviously, being an incredible writer, she just writes things. And part of this was to create a new myth of this time with people whose voices are usually marginalized and who don't usually feel that these landscapes are for them or that they're part of them. So creating this new myth that comes out of the Consequences Giant is something that we talked about all the way through. And as we finished working with the groups and we saw the final giant unveiled at Cernabus, Sita just suddenly, in a very short amount of time, wrote the most incredible new myth and new story that's connected to the creation of this new Consequences Giant and the people that made it and the giant itself. So yeah, are you happy to read it, Sita?
Yeah, so it's what I call a communal listening. It's what writers do. The giant in me sees the giant in you. For so many tides, the giant had held the hillside, tended lovingly by the local Cernabus community, standing strong, standing tall. The ancients, who had originally chalk-scored the giant's form into the landscape, were long gone. But in each short snatch of human time, the community kept on tilling the giant's ground by their caring hands, drawn to gather on common lands. Every day was different for the giant as he opened his eyes to birdsong, the brush of burgundy butterfly wings, driving rain, baking sunlight, hearty harvest gatherings, love's young dreams. He had seen it all. But as time and tide moved on, the giant began to feel the gradual loss of ancestral beings that once had walked and flown and skittered in the hillside too, and to bemoan that some humans not so far from his home had not yet taken pride in his hillside. It is said that a giant who lives with you feels the timbre and the tenor of the people in each time, their loves, their losses, their faiths, their longings, when their hearts swell with love and when the world turns to war. A giant can also feel the opening and closing of imagination doors. A giant feels the presence of new beings, human, animal, insect, birds, hailing from near and far. It is a giant's will to feel the footfall of the community, to invite gatherings of unity. For when you are a giant made of art, you know it in your chalky bones and heart. There is no way or reason to hide, even if you were that way inclined. At night, the giant began to dream more and more of ancestral beings and present-day far-reaching things. He felt a longing in his unchalked heart for renewed community harvest. When you're a giant, you see far. At night, you have the power to commune with the stars. You take it all in. A giant's iris crosses oceans, surfs the moon, hears all the tunes, the stories, the harmony, the hunger, harvests of plenty, times of war, times of love, times of hate, times of grief, times of peace. It's an earful for sure. A giant has no choice but to see far, hear far, feel far-reaching tales, to hold the globe in its giant bones, and sometimes, and this is not so much known, a giant standing alone can feel so very achingly alone. A giant's power is to feel the strata, to sense in its bones the eternal communal need to find a home. For every generation to make their mark in art, to write themselves into the landscape, leave something good behind, an essence, a presence, a strain of never to be forgotten music. Giants know that every century or so humans need a bit of a prod, a whir or whoosh. In such times, the giant sends out messages through the birds, the fungi, the trees, through the lowing of the cows, the buzzing of the bees. Over the Dorset fields, the giant's energy roamed into the hearts of the global, local community to gather in giant unity. While he waited for the call to spread, through the giant's mind played his favourite hymn of pleasant lands. And did those feet in present time walk upon this hillside green? They did. And what was sweetest was that those who usually don't get to walk the hillside, didn't even know the giant was a thing, got to care for him as well, to know the beauty of the landscape, to let the memory of walking to the giant seep in. The artists and the teachers from the local schools, the adults who spoke through paint, not words, who are seldom seen and heard, the earth guardians, the people who had travelled far from their birth homes, out of troubled zones, longing to find a welcome in the hillside, they walked with grace, treading softly on the earth of Cerne, laughing, singing, contemplating, naming wildflowers, birds, fossil finding, gathering chalk to make paint pigment, sketching leaves and trees, composing poems and listening to nature's score. And on the hillside they found that home. Truth be told, on the whole, they even forgot their mobile phones. As they nestled together on the hillside, the giant took them all to heart. The child who had travelled oceans, but in the built-up places felt confined. She was so feather-light, she nearly slid off the hillside. The young adult, whose family born of these lands, who did not speak but knew that elephants had once walked beneath their feet. The patient local elders and their families well met, recording butterflies for posterity and teaching young newcomers not to pick the cowslip or the primrose, to protect the butterflies of the locale. Oh, when he thought of the summer, there were too many sweet memories for this giant to hold. But no moment was sweeter than this. As these human feet gathered on the steep hill, after all their songs, feasting, and human nattering, there came a moment when every being stilled to listen, entranced to the song and dance of summer days. A midsummer daydream, if you will, when they lay on the ground and deep listened to the birds sing, to the grass grow, to the earth's river's eternal flow. Come September of that long summer, the giant began to feel the breeze of cooler tides, the rustling in the trees. The rain came, and the earth was quenched. But as can happen at this time of year, a brooding loneliness threatened to descend. But just when the giant was having a doze, what do you suppose? He began to hear distant voices approaching, a parade of bright dots floating, tiny voices he felt he knew. Awakening! The giant tuned his ear, wondering, can they possibly be calling to me? Giant, giant, what do you see? For a part of you is a part of me. Together we are giant, together we are strong. Together we weave magic of belonging in this song. He watched the bright dots grow as they possessed their voices stronger. Giant, giant, who will you be? Insect, animal, human, bee, tree? Curiouser and curiouser. The giant began to feel the stirrings of a radical ritual in his chalky head, heart, trunk, roots. The visitors arrived now on the hillside they knew and cared for too, feeling all familiar. Close your eyes, giant, the children said. Come on, giant, close your eyes. For now, you're in for a mammoth surprise.
Oh, wonderful, Sita. Thank you so much. Do you have anything to say, Becca?
Oh, I just love it. And the rest of that story is just absolutely wonderful. So that's just an excerpt, but yeah, I just, whenever you read Sita, I just feel so emotional. I have to like hold it down. It's just wonderful how you encapsulate it all.
So just to say, currently that piece is not available, or what's the plans? Or do we have any yet?
We haven't talked about it, but we have understood the power of this symbol in times where symbols are being used all of the time for good or ill. And we have understood, and so we are just taking our time, you know, like the mixing of the paint. It's slow work. Some of this we had to say to the children, this is not Deliveroo. You can't just have a color like that. We have to mix it. And I think that, you know, together, you know, Grace, Emily Manning, Becca, myself, and the whole team, I think we appreciate the importance of settling time to understand what has been made, and for the people that have been involved in it, that we take the good giant steps forward. And the best way to do that, we need still to kind of talk about.
Sure thing. So we're sort of coming towards the end of our time, which is incredible because I feel like there's so much more we could keep saying. If there's any more questions, do put them in the Q&A. Kate Wood, we've got a message here from Kate, who was the wonderful executive producer for Nature Calling, and also the local producer based in Dorset for Consequences. That question's just disappeared actually. Oh, here it is. There we go. So Kate just wanted to reflect, saying this has been such a needed and relevant project with real heart, and has been a very meaningful partnership. You've spoken a little about the CERN giant. Could you say something about the responses from local archaeologists too?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So when we unveiled the giant at CERN Abbas, we had a wonderful invited audience of historians and archaeologists and people who are academics who write about the ancient monuments that are on our landscapes, and specifically the CERN Abbas giant, as well as the community groups and the local people in CERN Abbas. And we had a wonderful archaeologist with us who had led a lot of the digs that had happened at the CERN Abbas giant, called Mike Allen, and he talked to us about how he'd actually dated the giant through snail shells, and talked about the process of doing the archaeology on the CERN Abbas giant. And the thing that I took away from that is that the CERN Abbas giant is so vertical. I mean, it's when we rigged our 30 by 40 meter giant on that hillside, the rigging team were on ropes, and you know, we had safety nets and so on, and archaeologists have been up on that hillside for years, kind of digging and trying to discover why it's there and how it's been there. So yeah, I think there's an inconclusive understanding of what the giant represents still now, which I think is wonderful because it means that it leaves space for imagination. But I think they've dated it as Anglo-Saxon, so he came along and was talking about that. Yeah, does that answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed hearing about yeah, I mean, just how it came about and what it sort of represents, you know, in terms of its how potentially it could be it's a signpost to the church or something, that, you know, and just all the stories and mythologies around giants, and how that you've interwoven, you know, to bring it into sort of contemporary storytelling, I think has just been such a wonderful element to the project. And I also just wanted to say something around something you mentioned in our little pre-talks as well, is about something around giving permission for people to interact in the land, you know, sort of quiet permission. There's sort of such grand statements. It's such a big piece of work. I mean, definitely, you know, scale, but it's actually made up of all these very small, quiet interventions, you know, moments, time, you know, this kind of slow work has made this sort of, so all the kind of the symbols are in there, and the mythology is sort of all part of it. You can pull on one thread, and there's just so many more to discuss. Is there any other last reflections that you'd like to say? I think we do have one other question, but Well, I could ask you to do a reflection, but there is quite a lovely, quite a long reflection or reaction from Phil Holden. So I'm going to read it all if that's okay. Right, a reaction, not a question. Just as I hoped and expected, this was a really heartwarming and affirming listen and watch in the webinar, so thank you. We operate a lot in the world and mindset of technical solutions, jargon and so on, which is such a narrow and limiting way to engage with people and the world. As whole people, we all have emotions, values and all of that which are critical to our motivation and to our relationships. And all that influences whether our technical solutions work or not. Whether we're building bridges with people who think differently to us, or maybe without meaning to alienating them. But we don't often think about this stuff or acknowledging its importance. I hope we can learn how to embed the mind-opening approaches you have achieved through this project and into our work more generally. So there you go. Very inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really
I have
lovely
something to say about giants quickly that I've been thinking about, because I think at the beginning, Corinne, you said about giants being quite male, and I think lots of people are reflecting that the Consequences giant has a kind of very feminine energy, which is quite interesting. And I've been doing a lot of more reading about giants recently, and about Gaia's giants and the Greek mythology around Gaia and her giants, and how the giants were Gaia's children, and obviously Gaia represents the earth and the giants represented the landscapes, and how the gods defeated Gaia's giants in a huge battle and overcame them. And I've been thinking a lot, as you do, as you reflect, as Sita was saying, we're still reflecting and gathering our thoughts about this huge project. It's made me think about how this project has been about creating these giants again, almost creating Gaia's land giants with communities, and that feels like it makes sense and sort of shifts, because this society, I believe, is slightly out of balance with the masculine and the feminine, and I think bringing that feminine energy back into landscapes is an important work to be doing. So I just wanted to reflect on that.
Yesterday, I went to see the Word for World exhibition, which is the mapping of Ursula Le Guin. And if you don't know the work of Ursula Le Guin, go and look it up. She's an extraordinary storyteller connected to landscape and culture and mythology and communal consciousness. And when we were talking about, the Cernabus giant and the different interpretations that there have been of why the giant's there, and why the scarification happened, and who came together to make it, either through harvest or for a war gathering place, and all of this, how mythologies are created. When I'm writing, I often try to put myself way into the future and think of, if people should stumble across this giant or this story, what would they make of the people of the time that were the creators of this work? And so I feel that the reason why that this work is so speaking into the heart of now is because it is a very it reveals itself to be a deep reflection of the communal consciousness of this time, and that has been seen, and the power of symbols in this time is just as important as it was in the Cernabus giant's time. So there's something that's timeless about the human wish to make these landmarks, which are about communal belonging, which I think we're reconnected to, and the irony of how we're communicating now in a webinar. As the world becomes giant in terms of communication in that way, similarly, the need to engage in understanding what the Duke of Burgundy butterfly is, or writing in a notebook about the flora and fauna of the area, feeling the earth, beneath your feet. These things become really giant in themselves and really important. And I think this project has really recognized that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's quite a lovely note to end on. So thank you ever so much. A huge thank you to Becca and Sita for your time today. It's been a wonderful conversation and a lovely opportunity to really revisit the project that happened. Just so everyone knows, this session today has been recorded and it will be edited into a 20-minute bite-sized podcast, which is available on our Nature Calling website. So do have a listen. And there will be a small feedback form at the end, if you wouldn't mind just sending it, responding to that if you're able. So as I said, this is the last of our 6 artist in conversation events, a part of Nature Calling. Nature Calling happened this year between May and October. So we are coming officially to the end of the season of work. So please do have a look at naturecalling.org.uk if you wanted to see the breadth of the work that was created over these last 6 months from not only our major 6 commissions, but also our other national landscapes, which did smaller programs of work, but certainly had the same level of heart work in it in terms of connecting new audiences to our national landscapes and creating new experiences and connection to nature. So it's been a wonderful 6 months. So thank you ever so much, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Sita.
Thank you.